Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join the Brave Animals community. You'll never want to miss another story of incredible bravery and heartwarming rescue. This is just the beginning. Let's dive right into today's unbelievable tale of loyalty and courage. It was a quiet morning in the sleepy town of Riverdale, where everyone knew each other, and the only thing that stirred the calm air was the soft hum of the breeze. The sun hung lazily in the sky, casting a warm glow over the peaceful streets. The town had always been a place where nothing much ever happened, where the biggest concern of the day was whether the local diner would serve pancakes or waffles. Yet that peaceful morning would soon be shattered by an event that no one could have foreseen. The Riverdale K-9 unit was out on their usual patrol, a small team dedicated to keeping the town safe. Their dogs were trained to detect everything from drugs to explosives, and they were respected members of the community. Bauer, a seasoned German shepherd, was on duty that day, his coat gleaming in the sunlight as he walked with his handler, Officer Davis. Bauer was known for being steady and calm, always quick to obey commands and never showing signs of aggression without reason. But on this morning, something unusual happened. As they strolled down Main Street, Bauer suddenly stopped, his ears pricked and his nose twitching. The quiet atmosphere of the town seemed to thicken, and something in the air shifted. "Officer." Davis glanced down at Bauer, who was no longer walking calmly by his side. Instead, the dog's posture was rigid, his tail stiffened, and his eyes were fixed on something ahead. The source of Bauer's unease came into view, a man sitting on the bench at the bus stop. His clothes were ragged, his face weathered, and his hands tightly clutched a tattered backpack. He looked like any other homeless man that occasionally passed through Riverdale, someone who had seen better days and was struggling to make ends meet. Yet, as Bauer's gaze locked onto the stranger, the dog's behavior became erratic. Without warning, Bauer barked. The sound was sharp and commanding, a warning that couldn't be ignored. His barks echoed through the streets, causing heads to turn. People walking nearby froze in their tracks, unsure of what to make of the situation. Officer Davis tried to calm Bauer, but the dog was unrelenting. With every passing second, his barks grew louder, more insistent. The crowd began to gather, drawn by the unusual spectacle. They watched as Officer Davis struggled to regain control of Bauer, who was fixated on the man at the bus stop. A few bystanders whispered nervously among themselves, exchanging worried glances. Was this man a criminal? Had he been spotted doing something suspicious? The fear spread quickly through the crowd as rumors started to swirl. Someone dialed 911, and within minutes 2 police cruisers arrived on the scene. Officers quickly surrounded the man, their hands hovering over their holsters. But the man didn't react. He didn't make any attempt to run or speak. He simply sat there, his hands still clutched tightly around the backpack, his face frozen in a mixture of fear and resignation. Bauer, however, wasn't backing down. His barking intensified as he pulled at his leash, his muscles tensing. It was as if he was trying to break free to get closer to the man, but Officer Davis held tight, his voice calm but firm. "Bauer, it's okay. Calm down, boy." But Bauer wouldn't listen. The officers closed in on the man, their eyes scanning him for signs of threat. As they approached, they began to ask him questions, trying to make sense of the situation. "Sir, what's in the bag?" one of the officers asked, his voice laced with suspicion. The man didn't answer. His only response was a quiet mutter. I was one of you." The crowd hushed as they tried to understand the man's cryptic words. What did he mean by "one of you"? And why had Bauer reacted so strongly? It was clear that something wasn't right, but no one could quite put their finger on what it was. The officers continued to press the man, but it wasn't until they began searching his bag that the truth started to unravel. Inside, they found nothing but a few old papers and what appeared to be a worn military ID. It was a surprising discovery. A tattered ID with the name Daniel Ruiz, a man who had once served in the military as a K-9 handler, was staring back at them. This was no ordinary homeless man. The crowd buzzed with disbelief. Could this be a mistake? How could someone who had served the country end up in such a dire situation? But that wasn't the only revelation. Tucked in the ID was a small, folded photograph. Officer Davis took it carefully, his hands trembling as he unfolded the paper. There, staring back at him, was a familiar face, a younger Daniel Ruiz standing next to a dog. The dog was Bauer. The puzzle pieces were starting to come together. The dog had recognized him. But why was Bauer reacting so violently? Why did Bauer, a trained canine who had never shown aggression without cause, bark so fiercely at a man who seemed so harmless? As the officers continued to examine Daniel's belongings, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity. There was a deeper connection between Bauer and the man at the bus stop, a bond that neither Officer Davis nor anyone else could yet understand. The morning that started with a barking dog had turned into a full-blown street spectacle. Yellow tape was slowly being stretched around the bus stop while people gathered behind it, whispering, recording with their phones, and throwing guesses, around like popcorn at a movie theater. "He must be dangerous. Dogs like that don't bark for nothing," said a woman holding her latte tight. "I heard he had a weapon in that bag," another man muttered as he hit record on his phone again, trying to get a better angle. But Officer Davis wasn't so sure. Bauer was trained to detect specific threats, explosives, drugs, and danger. But his reaction this morning didn't fit any of the standard alerts. It felt personal, emotional even. Bauer wasn't just barking out of instinct. He looked conflicted, almost torn. Still holding tightly to Bauer's leash, Davis kept his eyes on the man sitting slumped at the bench, who had still barely spoken since the first time he muttered the phrase, "I was one of you." The officers, who had arrived on scene, weren't taking any chances. They asked the man to stand slowly with his hands up. The man obeyed but kept his eyes low. One of the officers carefully took the weathered backpack from his hands and placed it on the sidewalk, unzipping it with gloved fingers. Inside were a few scraps of clothing, some worn military documents, and a dog-eared notebook. There was no weapon, no threat, nothing illegal. Just signs of a man who had been carrying a heavy past on his back for far too long. The younger officer who had arrived in the second patrol car, his name badge read Tom, approached with a cautious look. "Sir, what's your name?" he asked. "Daniel. Daniel Ruiz," the man replied, barely above a whisper. There was a silence that hung in the air after that. Officer Tom flinched for just a moment. It was quick, but Davis caught it. It was the kind of reaction you have when a name unlocks a memory you hope to forget. Tom stepped back quickly, turning toward one of the other officers. "Run his name through the system," he ordered. Davis could see something else, though. Tom was nervous. His face was pale, and his hand tightened slightly on his utility belt. Bauer, meanwhile, had shifted. He was no longer barking, but he kept. His eyes locked on Tom, his ears twitching as though sensing tension. Then, unexpectedly, Bauer let out a sharp bark. This time not at Daniel, but at Tom. The crowd gasped. A few stepped back instinctively, unsure of what this meant. Officer Davis tugged on the leash, but Bauer barked again, stepping protectively in front of Daniel. That was the moment the mood shifted. The crowd, who had once looked at Daniel with suspicion, now turned to Tom with confusion. The phones kept rolling. One woman in her 50s leaned over the tape and asked, "Why is the dog barking at the officer now?" Davis looked at Tom, trying to read his face. "You all right, man?" Tom forced a chuckle. "Maybe the dog's just confused. I smell like bacon or something." It didn't land. Not with the officers. Not with the public. One of the supervisors, Sergeant Hale, arrived and took charge. She was known around Riverdale as someone who didn't mess around. "All right," she said, clapping her hands together. "Let's clear the scene. Ruiz, you're coming down to the station. Not under arrest, just some questions. Officer Davis, bring Bauer along." Davis nodded, already concerned about what Bauer might do next. Inside the station an hour later, Daniel sat across from Officer Davis and Sergeant Hale in a quiet interview room. He had warmed up slightly, drinking a paper cup of black coffee, with both hands. Bauer lay quietly by Davis's side, watching Daniel with gentle eyes. "I used to work in the K-9 unit," Daniel said softly. "It was years ago, before everything went wrong." Sergeant Hale leaned in. "What do you mean by that?" Daniel didn't speak right away. He reached into the pocket of his ragged jacket and pulled out the old photo again, the one that showed him standing next to a younger dog that looked remarkably like Bauer. "That's Rex," he said. "My partner. We worked 3 years together. Best dog I've ever handled." He paused, swallowing hard. "During a mission, there was an explosion. We were clearing out a suspected meth lab. I got a family out before the place blew, but the blast cost Rex his life. I took the fall for a failed protocol, even though I followed everything by the book. They said I acted on my own, that I ignored orders. None of it was true." "Did you fight it?" Davis asked. "I tried, but the report was already filed. Testimonies were changed. I went from being decorated to being discarded. No one listened, not even my own unit." There was something raw in his voice, something honest. "Why didn't you just leave town?" Hale asked. Daniel smiled faintly. "Because I believed that someday someone would find out the truth." At that moment, Officer Tom knocked on the interview room window. His face was tight, and he motioned to Sergeant Hale. She stepped out. As she left, Daniel turned to Davis. "That dog, Bauer, he knew me, didn't he?" Davis nodded slowly. "I think he did. I helped write the training manual your department still uses. I'd bet money that dog was trained on my old curriculum." Outside the room, Tom was speaking fast to Hale. "We need to stop digging into this. It's ancient history. He's unstable." Hale folded her arms. "Why are you so concerned, Tom?" He hesitated. "Because my dad was on that case. He was the commanding officer." There it was. Back in the room, Davis asked, "Daniel, did you know Officer Tom's father?" Daniel's lips tightened. "Yes. He was the one who signed off on the report that ruined my life. The pieces were beginning to come together. A cover-up, a scapegoat, a decorated veteran discarded to protect someone higher up the chain, and now, years later, a dog had recognized his scent and sparked the unraveling of the story." Outside, Hale stood frozen with the new revelation. Inside, Bauer gently got up and walked over to Daniel, resting his head on the man's knee. Daniel blinked, then smiled through tears. "Good boy," he whispered. "You remembered." The truth had begun to surface, and a town that once turned its back was about to learn the story of a man they had forgotten, and the dog who never did. The small conference room at the Riverdale Police Department smelled like old coffee and the faint scent of leather from the worn chairs. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above, casting a sterile glow over everything. Daniel Ruiz sat at the edge of the chair with his hands folded in his lap, as if he were afraid to take up too much space. Officer Davis sat across from him, notepad in hand, while Bauer rested quietly by his side, still watching the man with calm, loyal eyes. There was a strange stillness in the room, as if time itself had paused to listen. Daniel's voice was steady, now. "I never thought I'd step into a police station again, least of all one where a dog still remembers me." Davis nodded. "We pulled your old service file. It took some digging, but we got a few documents. Everything was classified under an internal investigation. But something doesn't sit right." Daniel looked down at the cup of cold coffee in front of him, and then reached slowly into his coat. Davis instinctively tensed, but Daniel moved carefully, pulling out a tattered notebook wrapped in an old elastic band. The cover was scuffed and faded, and a dark rusty stain marked the bottom corner. "This was Rex's," Daniel said softly, handing the notebook to Davis. "It has training notes, shifts, deployment logs. After the explosion, I wrote everything. I remembered, not that anyone wanted to read it." Davis took the notebook and carefully peeled it open. Inside were pages upon pages of scribbled notes, some neat, others frantic as if written in a hurry. There were sketches of training courses, lists of commands, behavioral notes. And there, on the first page, was a line written in block letters. "If they erase the truth, someone has to remember it." Davis flipped through the pages until one in the middle caught his eye. A hand-drawn map of a warehouse on the edge of town, marked with a red X and notes about a rescue mission gone wrong. "This was the building that exploded?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "Yeah. It was supposed to be a meth lab raid, but the intel was too clean. Someone knew we were coming. When we entered, it was already rigged. I got the family out before it blew, but Rex didn't make it." Davis looked at Bauer. The dog had perked up slightly, as if he recognized the name. Then he turned back to Daniel. "And they blamed you?" "They said I entered without backup, that I ignored orders. But I didn't. My comms were live. Someone cut them after we were already inside." There was a pause as Davis processed it. "You think it was on purpose?" he asked. "I know it was," Daniel said quietly. "Someone needed a fall guy, and I wasn't part of the right circle to be protected." At that moment, the door opened and Officer Maria Delgado, a newer recruit with sharp eyes and a steady presence, stepped in. "I pulled some old footage from the station. Archives," she said, holding a USB drive. "It was deleted from our public system, but backup storage still had it." She plugged it into the screen on the wall. The room dimmed slightly as the grainy video began to play. A younger Daniel stood in full gear, talking to what appeared to be a team of officers outside a warehouse. His voice was calm, commanding, professional. Then another voice cut in, deeper, more authoritative. "Stand down, Ruiz. We don't have green light yet." The video glitched briefly, then resumed, but the audio shifted. Daniel's voice again. "We've got movement. I see kids. We're going in. Repeat, we're going in." Then static. Then nothing. Maria paused the video. This segment was clipped. "You can see where the frame stutters. Someone edited it." Davis looked at her. "Can you recover the missing frames?" "I'm working on it," she said. "But here's what's interesting. The timestamp shows the audio cutoff came 30 seconds before the explosion, which means comms were live." Daniel was telling the truth. Daniel looked up. There was no joy in his face, just a quiet kind of relief. "Someone tried to bury this," Maria continued, "and whoever did had access to our systems." Outside the room, Officer Tom paced the hallway. He had been listening from a nearby desk, and his face was tense. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick message to someone saved as Dad. "We have a problem. He's back." Back in the conference room, Davis handed the notebook back to Daniel. "Thank you for holding on to this," he said. "It's going to help us sort through the mess." Maria added, "We also found something else. Bauer's training log. When he was first registered as a pup, guess who wrote the evaluation notes?" She held up a file. Davis opened it and scanned the paperwork. The handwriting matched Daniel's notebook. Bauer had been trained with techniques developed by Daniel himself. That explained the reaction. "He knew you," Davis said softly, "even after all these years." Daniel reached down and gently scratched Bauer's head. The dog leaned into the touch without hesitation. "I always believed dogs remember more than we give them credit for," Daniel said. "Not just smells and commands, but people, loyalty, emotion." Suddenly the door swung open again. Sergeant Hale entered, her face unreadable. "We need to talk," she said, motioning to Davis and Maria. Outside the room, Hale lowered her voice. "Tom's behavior has been odd since this started, and I just got word that his father was the commanding officer during Daniel's last mission." Davis raised an eyebrow. "You think it's connected?" Hale nodded. "I think Tom knows more than he's letting on, and I think his father may have been involved in the cover-up." Maria added, "If we can retrieve the rest of that video, we'll know for sure." Hale glanced back toward the interview room. "Then let's finish what was started 7 years ago." Inside the room, Daniel sat quietly with Bauer resting, his head on Daniel's knee. It wasn't much, just a moment. But it was the first peace Daniel had felt in years. He didn't need a badge. He didn't need the title, just someone to believe him. And finally, someone did. Night had fallen over Riverdale, but inside the police department no one was sleeping. The station, usually quiet after 7 p.m., was buzzing with tension. Sergeant Hale stood in the digital forensics room, arms crossed, watching a tech named Jace fast forward through corrupted video footage frame by frame. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of the monitors, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Earlier that afternoon, Officer Maria Delgado had recovered a backup drive that held fragments of a deleted report. The body cam footage from the fateful night of the warehouse explosion. It had taken hours to decrypt, restore, and piece together, but they were finally looking at the part no one was ever supposed to see. "I think we've got it," Jace said, hitting the space bar to freeze the frame. On the screen was a grainy but unmistakable image. Daniel Ruiz sprinting toward a darkened building, shouting into his radio. "I can hear kids inside. We're moving." There was a clear voice in response, steady and cold. "Do not enter, fall back. We'll handle it after backup arrives." That voice belonged to Chief Martin Tomlin, Tom's father. Hale narrowed her eyes. "Keep playing." The footage continued, showing Daniel ignoring the command and running into the building. The camera shook as officers followed. A woman's scream echoed. Then, a massive explosion lit up the frame. Smoke. Shouts. Static. Another clip started. This one showed Chief Tomlin at his desk the next morning, speaking into a recorder. "Ruiz disobeyed direct orders. He put the unit at risk. I recommend full discharge and removal from all honors." Then he looked up into the camera and, in a low voice, added, "This is the best way. No one needs to know." Hale's jaw tightened. "Why?" "We're right," she said to Maria. "They buried him. They turned a hero into a ghost." Meanwhile, Daniel was sitting in the break room with Officer Davis and Bauer. He was nursing a warm cup of tea, something Hale had insisted they give him. Daniel looked better now, cleaned up with a new shirt and his face shaved, but the years of damage didn't fade so quickly. His eyes still held the weight of betrayal. "Do you really think they'll listen now?" he asked quietly. "They already are," Davis replied. "That video changes everything." Bauer, resting on the floor between them, lifted his head slightly and let out a low rumble, almost like he was agreeing. At that moment, Sergeant Hale entered with Maria right behind her. Hale didn't waste time. "Daniel, I need to show you something," she said. "It's going to be hard, but you deserve to see it." They walked to the tech room where Jace played the restored footage again. As Daniel watched the final moments of Rex's life, his breath caught in his throat. His hands clenched into fists, but he said nothing. Then came the clip of Chief Tomlin. That was the part that made Daniel close his eyes. "So it was him," he said. "He made me disappear." Maria spoke gently. "Your instincts were right. You were set up. Your comms were active the entire time. You saved those people. You didn't disobey orders." He lied. Sergeant Hale stepped forward. "We're preparing to bring this to the mayor. There will be a public statement. Chief Tomlin may be retired, but the truth has consequences." As the weight of it all settled in, Daniel looked down at Bauer. "None of this would have come out if that dog hadn't barked," he said. "It wasn't just barking," Davis said. "It was remembering." Across town, Tom sat alone in his apartment. His phone buzzed with missed calls from his father, but he couldn't bring himself to answer. On the screen, the footage had already leaked. Someone from inside the department had posted it online, and the views were climbing fast. Officer lied. Veteran blamed. K9 barks lead to truth. The comments were brutal. People demanded justice. Others questioned how this had gone unseen for so long. Tom stared at the wall in front of him, haunted by the realization. His father, his hero, had let a man be destroyed to protect his reputation. And deep down, Tom had always wondered if the story didn't add up. But he had chosen to stay silent. Now the silence was cracking wide open. The next morning, the mayor of Riverdale stood in front of a crowd gathered at City Hall. The press was there. So were the townspeople. And in the front row sat Daniel, Officer, Davis, Bauer, and Sergeant Hale. A large screen behind the podium played the key clips from the recovered footage. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the truth played out. Some people wiped away tears. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The mayor took the podium. Today, we honor a man who was wrongfully blamed, a man who risked his life to save others and was punished for doing the right thing. Daniel Ruiz, on behalf of the town of Riverdale, we owe you an apology and our gratitude. The audience stood as Daniel walked forward to receive a plaque and a reinstated Medal of Valor. He didn't smile, but he nodded with quiet dignity. Bauer followed him, standing tall and proud beside the man he had once learned from. Then Tom stepped forward. He looked like he hadn't slept. He faced Daniel and took a deep breath. "My father was wrong," he said, "and I was wrong for not speaking sooner. I'm sorry. You deserved better." The silence that followed was heavy. Daniel finally answered, "It's not your apology I needed, but I accept it anyway, for your sake." Later that afternoon, back at the station, the mood was lighter. Daniel sat outside with Bauer, the two of them soaking in the sunshine. Kids walked by and waved. One little boy even asked if Bauer was a superhero. Daniel chuckled. He just might be. Officer Davis joined him with a soda in each hand. "You ever think about coming back?" Davis asked. Daniel took the drink and leaned back. "Not to the badge," he said. "But maybe I could help train a few of the new pups. Teach them the old ways." Davis smiled. "We'd be lucky to have you." Bauer let out a soft bark as if in agreement, and as the sun dipped behind the trees, the town of Riverdale breathed a little easier, knowing the truth had finally come to light and justice, however late, had found its way home. The days following the press conference moved like slow waves through the town of Riverdale. The kind of days where people looked each other in the eye a little longer, spoke a little softer, and tried to process what had just unfolded. Daniel Ruiz wasn't a ghost anymore. The story of the wrongly accused K-9 officer had reached more than just the town. Regional news outlets picked it up, and then national ones. Headlines read, "Veteran cleared after 7-year smear campaign." K-9 dog uncovers the past, and just as photos of Bauer standing next to Daniel in front of City Hall became iconic, printed in local newspapers, shared on social media, and even displayed in the front window of the Riverdale Public Library. But despite the attention, Daniel stayed quiet. He turned down interviews, book deals, and podcast requests. He didn't want to talk. He wanted to listen, to heal. At the police department, things were changing too. Officer Tom had taken leave. No one blamed him. Not anymore. The pressure of knowing what his father had done, of being part of a system that failed someone like Daniel, had broken something inside him. But before he left, he did one thing that surprised everyone. He requested to meet Daniel, face to face. They met in the department's old training field, where Bauer used to practice agility runs. The place was empty, quiet except for the wind rustling through the oak trees nearby. Tom walked across the field, his steps slow and steady. Daniel was already there, tossing a tennis ball gently for Bauer, who caught it with a soft snap of his jaws. Tom stopped a few feet away. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. Daniel looked at him for a long second. "I don't need to forgive you," he replied. "That's something you'll need to find for yourself." Tom nodded. Then Daniel added, "But if you want to make it right, speak up, not just for me, for every other voice that got silenced." Tom swallowed hard and nodded again. That afternoon, the department released the unedited version of the internal investigation to the public, along with a new statement signed by the mayor and Sergeant Hale. Riverdale would launch a committee to review past misconduct cases involving veterans, mental health, and departmental cover-ups. It wouldn't erase what happened to Daniel, but it was a step forward. And Bauer? He was still working. Not as a patrol dog, but something new. At the suggestion of Officer Maria Delgado, the department introduced a new program, Healing Pause, a community initiative to help veterans and first responders with PTSD by pairing them with retired or specially trained K-9s. Guess who they asked to lead the pilot program? Daniel said yes. Not right away. He took a few days to think about it, to talk with Bauer on their walks through the woods behind the small trailer he was still living in. But one morning, as he watched Bauer run ahead and stop to wait for him, like he always did, Daniel whispered, "I think we still have work to do, buddy." The first training session was held at the local VFW hall. 4 veterans showed up, 3 men and 1 woman. All wore that same guarded look Daniel once carried. Arms crossed, faces unreadable. No one spoke much at first, but when Bauer entered the room, everything changed. The woman broke down in tears. One of the men knelt and let Bauer nuzzle his cheek. Another man asked if he could just sit in the corner with the dog. Daniel said yes to everything. Later that night, Davis showed up to visit. He found Daniel sitting out front with Bauer by his feet and the notebook in his lap, the same one stained with blood now with fresh pages filled in. "You're writing?" "Again," Davis said, handing Daniel a coffee. "Yeah," Daniel answered. "Not for anyone else, just to make sense of it." Davis sat down beside him. "You know, a lot of people in this town didn't believe you. They saw a homeless guy on a bench and assumed the worst." "I don't blame them," Daniel said. "You should." Daniel smiled faintly. "Nah, I've done enough blaming. Time to build something instead." They sat in silence for a moment, watching Bauer sleep. Finally, Davis said, "What you're doing with those vets, it matters. You're giving people hope." Daniel looked down at Bauer and said, "I'm just following his lead." A few weeks later, Riverdale hosted its annual fall festival. The town hadn't planned on doing anything special, but the city council surprised everyone with a tribute ceremony on the main stage. Sergeant Hale took the microphone and said, "Today we want to honor a local hero, not just for what he did in the line of duty, but for what he's doing now, building a better future." She motioned for Daniel to come forward. The crowd stood and clapped, some even cheering. Daniel walked up modestly, Bauer at his side, wearing a brand new service vest stitched with one word, teacher. As the applause quieted, Hale leaned into the mic and asked the crowd, "If it weren't for a dog's instinct, how many more years would the truth have stayed buried?" She paused, then added, "In your heart, when you see someone forgotten, will you trust your instincts or will you turn away?" The crowd stayed quiet for a moment, taking in the weight of the question. Later that night, Daniel sat under the stars behind his small house, notebook on his lap again. He wrote, "Justice didn't come easy, it never does, but it came barking, loud and true, not because the world wanted to listen, but because a dog refused to forget." He closed the notebook and leaned back. Bauer rested his head in Daniel's lap, eyes closing slowly. "I got you," Daniel whispered, "and you've always had me." The seasons had turned. In Riverdale, the trees wore their golden coats proudly, shedding crisp leaves that danced along the sidewalks. The wind had that soft autumn chill that made people pull their jackets tighter, but also breathe a little, deeper. It was a town that for the first time in a long while felt at peace with itself. Daniel Ruiz now lived in a small but cozy house on the edge of town. The place had been donated through a local veteran support foundation after the town rallied behind him. The siding was fresh, the porch wide, and out back sat a fenced yard where Bauer liked to stretch his legs every morning. The town had changed, but so had Daniel. The lines on his face had softened. He still moved with the quiet caution of a man who had seen too much, but there was a new light behind his eyes. Not joy exactly, more like steadiness, purpose. The Healing Pause program had expanded. What started with 4 veterans now included 15. They met weekly in a converted barn near the community center. Daniel led each session with patience and a quiet confidence that came from experience, not rank. Bauer, now wearing a navy blue therapy vest, moved among the vets like he could feel their pain before they even said a word. Some of the dogs were former police canines like Bauer. Others were rescue dogs with gentle hearts and keen instincts. The program wasn't about training them to detect danger. It was about teaching them and their human partners that connection could save a life in more ways than one. One chilly Saturday morning, Daniel stood in front of the group, holding a leash attached to a young golden retriever named Rosie. She was assigned to Marcus, a former Marine who had barely spoken in 3 sessions. Rosie came from a shelter in the next county over, Daniel told the group. She was found chained behind a warehouse, scared, didn't trust people, but now she's learning how to connect again. Rosie nudged Marcus's hand. He flinched at first, then slowly reached down and let her press her nose against his palm. She doesn't need you to be okay right away, Daniel said gently. She just needs to know you're trying. The barn was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt sacred. After the session, as the veterans began to pack up, Officer Maria Delgado stopped by with a stack of flyers in hand. We're doing a feature. Story in the county paper, she said. You mind if I snap a few photos? They want to highlight how the program's helping. Daniel chuckled. As long as you don't ask me to smile too wide. Maria lifted her phone and caught a shot of him crouched next to Bauer, who was licking the face of a 6-year-old girl visiting with her father. Her laughter rang out through the barn, and for a moment everything felt lighter. That night, back at home, Daniel sat on the porch with Bauer lying at his feet. He had a mug of hot cider in one hand and Bauer's leash loosely looped in the other, even though the dog didn't need it anymore. The stars were out sharp and bright against the dark sky. Crickets sang their nightly tune. Somewhere in the distance, a train rumbled softly. Daniel looked down at Bauer. You changed everything, he said, and not just for me. He thought about how one bark, one moment, had unraveled a lie that held him in the dark for years, and how that same bark had brought him home. I used to think I was broken, he whispered. But maybe I was just waiting for the right reason to stand back up. Bauer wagged his tail slowly, like he understood every word. The next morning was Sunday, and Daniel walked into the local diner for the first time in years. The bell above the door jingled, and all eyes turned toward him. For a second, he hesitated. Then, the owner, a gruff old man named Harold, stepped out from behind the counter and said, "Coffee's on the house, son." People nodded, smiled. Some clapped. One woman stood and hugged him. He sat down at the booth near the window, where the morning light streamed in. Bauer sat beside him, calm and proud. Harold brought over a plate of pancakes and said, "That dog of yours has more fans than our high school football team." Daniel smiled. He earned it. They ate quietly. Nothing flashy, just pancakes and peace. And for Daniel, that was more than enough. Outside, a boy passing by pointed and shouted, "That's him! That's the dog from the video." Bauer didn't flinch. He was used to it now. He looked up, eyes bright, ears relaxed. He'd done his job. Daniel paid the bill and left a tip twice the size of the meal. As he and Bauer walked home, people waved. Some stopped to shake his hand. A few handed him envelopes marked "Thank you" or "For the dogs." Daniel accepted them with gratitude, but also with humility. He didn't want to be a hero. He just wanted to be useful. Later that evening, Daniel received a letter from the governor's office. Inside was an invitation to speak at a national K9 training conference in Washington. They wanted him to share his story, not just about what went wrong, but about how it was made right. Daniel stared at the letter for a long time. Then he folded it and tucked it away. Maybe someday. For now, his work was here. The story of Daniel Ruiz was no longer one of betrayal, but of rebuilding. A man once erased from the system had not only reclaimed his name, he had turned his pain into purpose. And through it all, a dog named Bauer never left his side. Their bond had survived loss, lies, and time. But more than that, it had become a bridge, for healing, for justice, and for hope. As the final light of the day faded over the rooftops of Riverdale, Daniel sat beside Bauer in their backyard, watching the stars blink alive. "Funny how it all started," he said softly. "One bark, 1 second. And everything changed." He ran a hand through Bauer's fur and asked the night, more than himself, how many truths are still buried just because no one's willing to listen? And if it happened to you, would anyone believe the dog? The end.